Hello, can you hear me?
Greetings. Yes, I
Greetings.
can hear you. How
Thank
you
you.
doing?
I'm doing incredible, actually.
Cool.
Um,
Excellent. Excellent.
how about you?
I'm doing pretty good. I will say that I'm probably not at the top of my game. I can't say that I've been sleeping very well following the news that's been going on globally. Right now things have been pretty uh, exciting in not the good way, right?
Yeah,
And so anytime you have something like that, especially something that's taking place essentially, half time, it's like 12 hours off from us, right, halfway around the world. And
yeah.
so it's been challenging to go to sleep at night, knowing that, wonder what's going to be happening while you're asleep over halfway around the world.
I really do understand that. As you know, as like teenager myself,
Right.
it is so weird to have what could lead to a nuclear war happening, and then you just have to still keep going on in your life like it's
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. You
like
can't let it eat at you like that. Yeah.
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 Like any of it could just end at any point, and then you're like, why am I even going to class?
There's a little bit of a fatalism there, isn't there?
Yeah,
Yeah, no, well, if it's any consolation to you, I'm an old man, right? I've been around a little while. I wasn't alive during the Cuban Missile Crisis, obviously,
yeah,
but I can tell you that no, I think the odds of this escalating to that kind of level, I think are minuscule. I just don't think that that's something you should let eat at you at this point. Um,
yeah.
there's a lot going on, yeah, and it's pretty ugly, yeah, and some people are rattling some pretty big sabers, but I don't think it's going to go that far.
Yeah. Since we're already on the topic,
Sure.
actually, briefly, I would like to mention that we are recording this interview. I assumed you knew that, but
Yes, I do.
just under Florida law, I have to know that
Right.
your
No
consent.
problem. No problem.
So since we're already on the topic about, I'm assuming you're talking about the Ukraine situation.
Yes.
Um, I would like to just pivot a second to my questions I had about that. But do you believe that the United States is not do you believe, but does your party believe that the
Hmm.
United States' response has been effective, or do you think it's gone too far in some ways, or what is your position on sanctions and other things President Biden and Congress has done?
Right. We've actually been having some pretty heated debate inside the party. In fact, as recently as 5 minutes ago, I was on
Oh,
instant messaging with about 8 members of the executive and national committee, having some conversations about that.
yeah,
And obviously, we haven't issued an official policy statement on that, but I can tell you kind of which way the winds are blowing on it.
yeah,
Um, Generally speaking, and we were pushing. We made our stance fairly clear early on, before, I think, really before some of the more strong stances of Europe and the United States kind of gelled, and we issued a statement basically saying, look, uh, for us, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, these things aren't just paper or history, not just archival documents. Um, we actually believe in them, and we believe that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that those rights are derived by the consent, by the just government, by the consent of the governed, right? And so from that standpoint, we believe that the United States has an ethical and moral imperative, and we, as citizens of the United States, have an ethical and moral imperative to be supportive of any government that rules by the consent of the governed, and especially in situations where that nation and those peoples are under attack from a government that does not. And so we were pretty adamant that we felt like the United States and Europe especially had to step in and take action. We also did not and still do not support the idea of direct military intervention by U.S. armed forces. We believe that would be a step too far under the current circumstances, considering that this is Russia's next door neighbor, and Russia is a bit testy about the idea of foreign troops entering countries like that are right next to them like that.
yeah.
So So from an overall standpoint, I would say that we're generally supportive of the steps that Europe and the United States have taken. The sanctions, we recognize that those sanctions and these economic steps that they've taken are going to be painful. They're going to be very damaging to Russia as a deterrent, and they're going to be damaging to us as well. It's not a free ride. You know, our forefathers in World War I and World War II and other conflicts were willing to accept those kinds of sacrifices and hardships in order to protect other people around the world. And so we feel like this is kind of in line with that.
I definitely agree with you, and a lot of what you just said. As you know, majority of the American public, they do not want an intervention, and they are quite tired of the United States even getting involved in a lot of
Militarily, right?
militarily conflicts.
Yes, that's right.
And they do support the current sanctions.
Right.
There's a few ways I want to go about this. So, since we're still on the Russian-Ukraine topic, I would like to just get through these questions. So, the Reform Party does not support a no-fly zone. Is that correct?
We've actually, you know, we've been kind of discussing that. I would say that we don't have a solid attitude towards supporting a no-fly zone at this time. We're not convinced that it could be effective. We have similar concerns that the administration does. You know, Ukraine has somewhere around 60, a little less than 60 functional aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft right now.
Yeah.
Russia has, I don't know how many, hundreds, right? And the number of sorties that both Russia and Ukraine are flying with fixed-wing aircraft over Ukraine is minuscule. It's like dozens per day, because both of them are rightly terrified of their own anti-aircraft missile systems, SAM systems. They both use the same SAM systems. They know how effective they are. Nobody has neutralized those threats on either side. And so using fixed-wing aircraft over Ukraine right now would be a pretty bad idea, frankly, in any kind of large numbers. And a no-fly zone doesn't stop ballistic missiles, and it doesn't stop cruise missiles, and it doesn't stop artillery, which is really what's primarily being used to devastate urban centers in Ukraine right now. And so we're not, I think we kind of go along with that we're not convinced that a no-fly zone would be very effective. And a no-fly zone would have to be enforced by who, right? U.S. or NATO military. And again, that goes back to our previous statement. We don't think that there's an effective way to do that. We don't want American jets over Ukraine right now.
So like you were saying, you know, the United States should be, in many ways, what you just said, the United States should be a defender of democracy and free people across the world.
Even when we disagree with them.
Even when we disagree with them. So would you support the relatively, up until the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine, the relatively neutral countries of Sweden and Finland? Would the Reform Party support them entering NATO?
They are sovereign states with good democratic republic governments, right? They represent the will of their public, and it's that, frankly, we have the same attitude towards Ukraine. That's their decision. That's not our decision, you know. And if that's what they want, then that's what they should be able to do.
I know a new poll finally showed that for the first time, a majority of Finland's support NATO membership. So,
that's correct, yeah.
So assuming that Finland would want to join NATO, would the United States allow them to?
I think that absolutely should. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that again, that comes back to, that's their decision. Now, the nice thing about NATO is it is a primarily defensive alliance, and the number of times that NATO has intervened. Actually, I can tell you that NATO has never unilaterally intervened in a conflict. It has always been either due to a country attacking a NATO member, or it has been a situation where there was a UN vote or some sort of serious international unified response that asked them to intervene.
I may be wrong, but I believe the only time NATO has ever intervened was after the United States was attacked after September 11th.
Right. I think they referenced Article 5 and said that consisted of an attack on a NATO member, and therefore they were justified in sending troops.
Now, some have remarked that this invasion might also have some part to play with the United States and NATO expanding NATO after the
Mhm.
fall of the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
with countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia.
Mhm.
Would you agree that NATO has any fault to this, or do you believe this
Yeah.
is just in many ways Vladimir Putin he was always going to do this? He was always going to try to reestablish his empire.
Well, at that time, we didn't know. I mean, you can, if you look at the history of those border states, the former Soviet republics, and how they ended up part of the Soviet Union, part of the Russian Empire, part of the Soviet Union,
Mhm,
and the history of their relationship with the Russian peoples.
mhm.
It's understandable why they would be very,
Yeah.
very nervous about their independence and their sovereignty in the face of a very powerful neighbor. I will say that it's also understandable why Russia, with its history of being invaded and its relatively flat plain between, many of its major metropolitan areas and other states that had historically been hostile, and then the lessons they learned during World War I, World War II, prior to that with Napoleon. It's understandable why they would be nervous at having a unified military presence on their borders. And so, from my standpoint, I think that NATO probably did make a miscalculation that I think could have been remedied, and that would have been that they perhaps should have had a formal process for adding those border states as NATO aligned, but without the ability to have a NATO military presence there. And that you basically give them the protection of NATO from the standpoint of they're under the defensive umbrella,
Yeah.
but there's an agreement that you can't station NATO troops there themselves, so that the Russians don't have to worry about a military buildup right on their border. And there were some verbal assurances like that were given to Russia after the breakup of the Soviet Union, but it wasn't in writing.
Yeah, you're referring to President Bush and former Soviet Premier Gorbachev, correct?
Correct. And follow up with Yeltsin as well. Yeah.
Um, and you are very right that like these countries, they desperately did want to join NATO, as after World War I, many of these countries got independence, and that was stripped from them when World War II happened.
Correct.
And Joseph Stalin invaded nearly half of Europe.
There goes Poland, right?
Yeah.
Again.
Some have compared the Russian invasion of Ukraine as similar as the United States invasion of Iraq. Would you agree with that? Would you agree that both are equally bad, or like what is the Reform Party stance on that?
Well, the Reform Party was generally opposed to the invasion of Iraq. And I would say that because we are more non-interventionist, we were less opposed to intervention in Afghanistan, but we're
which is understandable.
Let's just say that we're a little bit cynical about the United States' ability to nation build. We don't have a very good track record of nation building since World War II, right? We did a good job with Germany and Japan with supporting them, and with the Marshall Plan, and with building up Europe. And now Japan is an economic powerhouse and a staunch ally of the United States, right?
Yeah, but as well as South Korea.
As well as South Korea, exactly. So there are situations where we've done that, but the reality is that the creation of a representative republic out of nothing, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and it can't be imposed externally very well. And really, the best you can do is start at the ground level and work your way up. Building up a governmental bureaucracy that's actually focused on governing, rather than using that for influence or grift, or using it as a way to siphon off, or to create your own little fiefdoms. That kind of thing takes cultural shifts and time. When you've had a country that's been war torn, that's been run by warlords, as Afghanistan was. There was an opportunity in Afghanistan to have a significant positive impact. And I would say a lot of Reform Party members would argue that we squandered that by shifting our focus to Iraq.
Mhm.
That we went into Iraq under false pretenses, either knowingly or unknowingly, and we went about it in a way that was not effective towards our goals. Because the thing about Iraq, you have to understand a lot, and this goes with a lot of these countries in the Middle East, is that the boundary lines for these nations were set by the British, right?
Yeah, the British and France after World
The
War
British
One.
and the French after World War One, and in many cases the lines are somewhat arbitrary or specifically designed to separate national blocks, ethnic and cultural blocks among multiple countries to prevent them from becoming influential. The Kurds is a great example of that.
Mm.
You have Kurds in Iran, in Iraq, and in Turkey, and they were basically pushed down and stomped on in all three countries, and never given the opportunity to have cultural freedom, linguistic freedom, that sort of thing, religious freedom. And so in Iraq, you really had three major blocks, right? You had the Shia in the south, the Sunnis in the middle, and the Kurds in the north. The Ba'ath Party was, a kind of a neo-fascist organization that represented a minority of the population. They were a plurality, but a minority of the population. But yet they basically ran the country like it was their own personal fiefdom.
Yeah.
And so, had there been a real reason to, our argument as the Reform Party would have been, look, if there's a reason to intervene in Iraq, it's to protect the Kurds or the Shia, and then leave the Sunni to their own devices. Unless, because the Sunnis seemed to be relatively happy with their government, right? It was the Shia and the Kurds that were being beaten down. The problem is that the geopolitics of it, right? Turkey didn't want the Kurds to have independence, and Saudi Arabia sure didn't want the Shia to have their independence, and so there were a lot of moving parts there, right? Here we are with two allies at the time, not wanting to do what really probably should have been done, or we should have just really stayed out of it.
I have a few questions. I was just reminded that I didn't ask you whether or not you believe Ukraine should join the EU. What's your position on that? Because I know if they were to join the EU, that could lead to a much larger conflict. That could lead to NATO. Like, what is the position on the Reform Party of Ukraine joining EU?
Again, it's going to go back to self-determination. I think that Ukraine has the right to join the EU, and the EU has the right to invite them to join if that's what they want.
Okay.
And I think the rest of the Reform Party would agree with me on that stance. I think that it's going to be up to Ukraine to decide the pros and cons of that and the risks and rewards of that, because they're the ones that are going to, Russia's not going to attack the EU, the rest of the EU, if Ukraine joins. They're going to further make Ukraine's life miserable. And so it's really up to Ukraine whether the rewards will outweigh the risks of that.
When you're speaking about Iraq, does the Reform Party support an independent state for Kurds?
I don't think we have a stance on that at this time.
Okay.
I can tell you again, our general stance. Our general stance is government by the consent of the governed and national self-determination. Right? And we're firm believers in that.
You know what? I quite like that answer, just because I don't know. So few politicians are like, it's so hard for them to admit that they don't know or they don't have a position on that. So it was nice to hear you just say, I simply don't have one yet.
Yeah, we don't have one specifically on that. No, there's a lot of stuff that, when you get down to the details, I can give you our general direction, and that might inform you on which way we would go if it came to a head.
Yeah.
But we don't necessarily have a policy defined on everything that can come up the pipe.
Well, we're still on the foreign policy side. Did the Reform Party support Joe Biden's removal of American troops in Afghanistan?
Oh boy, the answer is okay. So we don't, we're wary of saying we support or oppose a particular elected official, right? Because as far as we're concerned, they're all a little bit of screw ups.
Which is fair.
Yeah, because they're not ours, right? If it was our candidate, he would be doing a wonderful job. So no, I would say that generally speaking, the Reform Party agreed that we needed to extract ourselves from Afghanistan. Absolutely agreed with that. That was a necessity, and we also understood that President Trump had signed a treaty with the Taliban.
He had,
without letting the Afghan national government have any say in the matter. saying essentially that if the Taliban would cease attacks on American resources and NATO forces and U.S. forces, that notice that we didn't include any security arrangements for the Afghan national government there, that we would withdraw by X date. And so you can say what you want about the positives or negatives about setting a timeline, and I think in our opinion that's really kind of dumb, right? To set a hard timeline like that with it basically says, okay, well, the clock's on our side now, all we have to do is wait, right? And so I don't think that the United States had any choice once that document was signed other than to follow through with that. And unfortunately, the consequences of that decision were exactly what we feared they would be. That the Taliban had a year to specifically place their resources where they wanted, to plan the day, time, and minute of when they would flip the switch. And when the time came, it was staggering, wasn't it? How quickly they inserted themselves into all of the locations. It turned out that the Afghan National Army was basically, mostly on paper, that a lot of people had been siphoning off money or bribing them, and the ones that couldn't be bribed were very quickly assassinated by the Taliban forces.
It is quite tragic what happened in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, many of our soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq, they suffered from burn pits. What is the Reform Party's plan if elected? What would they deal with it? Like, would our soldiers have coverage under a Reform Party administration?
Yeah, and you're talking about exposure to toxic chemicals from the disposal, burning of God knows what, right?
Yeah. Sometimes they say radioactive material.
Right.
Like,
right. There's fundamentally, the Reform Party stance on our armed forces is that the armed forces should be used when necessary, sparingly, and that the lives of our soldiers matter, both while they're serving and afterwards. And we've always been, one of Ross Perot was a strong advocate for servicemen. I remember the whole POW MIA thing. I mean, he paid money to get some of those men out.
That was insane to me, reading about what he did.
Incredible. And so
when he got those men out of Iran as well. Yeah.
And so we're strong advocates for the interests of our armed forces, our soldiers, and servicemen and servicewomen who are putting their lives on the line, right? You sign away some of your rights in order to, and you agree to protect the nation. So from our standpoint, it's nearly criminal to put our soldiers in harm's way for reasons that do not represent the interests of the United States. In a place that does not want them there. And it is criminal to throw them aside afterwards and not support them. It's to introduce unnecessary harm and risk to them beyond what they're already facing in an active combat zone. So, our standpoint is that you don't just shrug your shoulders and say, well, they signed up for it. We have an obligation to protect their health and to take care of them when they return home, both mental health wise and physically.
It's not like the Taliban did that to them or Al Qaeda. It's what we did to our own soldiers. Now, many of our veterans come home and they have a significantly hard time rehabilitating back to normal life. What is the Reform Party's plan to deal with, the just countless veterans who are on the streets at the moment?
I don't think we don't have hard specifics on that. We do recognize, that we have a mental health crisis in this country. Physical health and health insurance is fairly well defined at this stage. It's too expensive, and that's a whole other issue. But the United States, if you go back, prior to the 80s, right? We used to have mental health facilities they would call them sanitariums or asylums.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of problems with them. They were horribly run in many cases. They were horribly managed in many cases. People were put in there and basically just forgotten, right? And there was a lot of outcry over how poorly they were being operated. And so the solution to that was to shut them down,
Yeah.
and not replace them with anything.
Yeah. Kick them off.
Yeah, kick them off. And so now what you find is that what's being used as mental health facilities for a lot of people who have long-term mental health issues that can't be managed or aren't managed is either homelessness, or they end up in incarceration.
Mhm.
Because of their mental health issues, they end up committing crimes, and they end up incarcerated. And this is not an improvement, right? That's no
Yeah.
better than the problem that we had before with these horribly run mental health facilities. And so, we've had a lot of conversations inside the Reform Party about the very poor state of our mental health system and how expensive it is to get good care for mental health issues, whether you're a veteran or not in the United States. And so from our perspective, we need a complete revamp of the mental health system in the United States.
Mhm.
And it goes along, and it goes hand in hand with obviously veterans care and with our homelessness problem, because a lot of our homeless end up being individuals with mental health issues, with drug addiction issues, and or with PTSD, right?
Mhm.
With issues from having served a lot of times. And so, and again, that goes back to our stance on drug addiction is very similar. Is that we're not strong believers in using prisons to handle drug abuse issues, right? We believe that we need to treat these folks. This is a this is a health issue. It is not a crime issue per se.
Yeah. That was a stance Bobby Kennedy vastly supported. Now there's a few places I want to go before we just talked about.
Of course.
So Ross Perot, as far as I know, supported universal single-payer healthcare. Is that still the stance of the Reform Party?
I wouldn't think so. I don't think so. No, I don't think that we are in favor of universal single-payer healthcare. The problem with is that healthcare is really complicated now.
Mhm.
It's one of the largest economic drivers that we have. The healthcare industry, and don't fool yourself, it's an industry, is huge. It's a huge profit center. It employs an incredible number of Americans.
Mhm.
And so any dramatic reform that you implement is going to have a huge destabilizing effect on the whole system, and the law of unintended consequences. So I can tell you that the Reform Party supports incremental improvements in the healthcare system. We want everybody to have access to healthcare. One of the problems that we have with the Affordable Care Act, and this is actually this will give you an idea of where we come from. The Affordable Care Act, the goal was to provide health insurance coverage to all Americans, right? But they called it the Affordable Care Act, but it actually isn't the Affordable Care Act. It's the Affordable Insurance Act. And it's actually not really all that affordable for a lot of people. And the real issue is not that the reason why health insurance is expensive is because health care is expensive. The United States, if you combine public and private spending on health care in the United States to the other 10 similar Western nations, the United States spends 2 times to 3 times as much per person on health care compared to any other comparable Western country with the same or worse outcomes. We spend a huge amount of money on healthcare.
Here's the thing. Many would say that we're already spending an incredible amount of money.
Yep.
So, and many would also argue that since we're experiencing an ongoing pandemic, it is the absolute right time to implement a single payer system. As some have argued that on a person to person basis, you would actually save more money because you wouldn't have to pay co-pays and premiums and all these different things than insurance is put on the American people. So what would be the response to that? And also, what would be the response? Is this Reform Party support a public option or just a simple expansion of Medicaid?
I don't think we've dug down into the details on that
Okay.
at this time. So the problem with, let's take an example. So let's say we did shift to a single payer system.
Okay.
And so you've now basically cut the core out of a huge slice of the American employment.
Yeah.
Basically, if you actually implemented that in any sort of short time frame, you would literally tank the economy, because the number of people that would lose their jobs, it would be pretty staggering.
Okay.
And that's why we talk about using an incremental, kind of an incremental system. Now, and then the other side of that is that a single payer system is only as good as it is and doesn't leave you with alternatives. And Americans tend to, for better or for worse, right? Americans tend to want options. They tend to want choices, and they tend to not like it when you say, you only get one option, right? And there's a little bit of a fundamental orneriness in us, right? And an independent streak that converge on the stubborn, and that's sometimes a good thing, right? So what we want, I think fundamentally, is we want the costs of services, medical services, to go down. And we'd like to see that phased in over time. We want insurance to be accessible to everyone and portable, meaning that it's not necessarily tied to your job. And if you lose your job or switch jobs, you don't have to switch insurance. We'd like to see choices in your healthcare. We don't generally like this idea that you get one insurance company, you lock in with them, and now you can only see certain providers. So that entire way that the system is designed, right now, there's a huge amount of opaqueness in how medical decisions are made, how they're billed, how much they cost, who gets to decide whether they're reasonable or not. These things are made in contracts between the health insurance company and healthcare providers, and you're just stuck along for the ride. You're not actually able to make the decisions on this. And I can tell you here in Texas, I have to buy my own insurance. I work on a contract basis. I don't have a group policy that I can buy. And so I have to purchase it on the open market. And there are only about 3 or 4 insurance companies that even offer insurance to people like me in the state of Texas. I get no subsidies. The cost of insurance on a monthly basis for my family is in the thousands. It can be in the thousands of dollars per month. Okay, from 1,500 to 2,000 or more a month for health insurance. That's how much a person who's paying the full premium themselves ends up paying for a family.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously expensive, and the benefits actually aren't that great. The out-of-pocket in those situations is actually still quite high. And and my choices in healthcare providers seem like they shrink every year, and these things change on a week-by-week basis, a month-by-month basis, a year-by-year basis, and we don't have any power. And so if you really want to the key here is if you want the Republicans say they want market-driven healthcare, right? Because they say it's efficient. The Democrats typically want a single-payer system. They want to have the government protecting us and providing this as a service to make sure that it's fair. And the Reform Party stance, generally speaking, is neither of those things. Generally, what we want is actual transparency, actual consumer choice, actual consumer power over these things. I want to be able to say to my insurance company, I don't like how you're treating me. You're too expensive. I'm going to go to a new insurance company, and I'm going to take every dollar of unused premium that I've ever paid you with me, and I'm going to give it to that new insurance company so they want me as a customer. As an example,
Continue to go.
And so that's the kind of power that you can actually strike a balance between what the Republicans are talking about, which frankly doesn't work.
Yeah,
right.
We've seen that.
Yeah, it's predatory, frankly, right? Healthcare in this country right now is economically predatory.
Yeah.
And you have people that will spend their whole lives earning money, building wealth, getting ahead, right? They're saving up for retirement. They have their house paid off. They've got their car paid off. They're 55, 60 years old, right? And they're ready to enjoy their golden years. And all it takes is one healthcare disaster that they had nothing to do with. There was nothing they could have done to foresee it or prevent it. And they end up having to file for bankruptcy to pay their medical bills.
It's insane.
it's a travesty is what it is.
Yeah.
It's predatory, and that kind of thing that needs to change. We need to have protections for people from having to lose their livelihoods and lose their entire life savings and lose their retirement in order to pay for medical bills. It's incredible. And we need people to have, again, we need people to have actual choice in what medical providers they use.
Mm-hmm.
And not dictated by insurance companies. We need to have transparency in costs and the value and the quality of services of the medical providers that they're using. We need to have insurance portability so that if they change jobs, lose jobs, move to another place, that they can still keep their insurance and keep that value. And if they do choose to change insurance companies, the insurance companies should have an incentive to not want to lose them, a financial incentive. There should be some penalty for losing a customer. You do those things, you'll see a sea change in how healthcare is priced.
Mm-hmm.
And this doesn't even go into the artificial scarcity of many medical professions, right? Because a lot of medical specialties are, frankly, they're artificially limited, either because of limited numbers of residencies or because they're actually limited space in specialty schools, and these drive the prices up. It's healthcare education is super expensive. The cost of getting a medical degree and becoming a physician is just incredible in some cases. So all these things are very inflationary, right?
Yeah. That actually leads me to another question. One, what is the stance on universal free college for the Reform Party, as well as should there be, if you're a public official, and I mean like a firefighter, doctors, nurses, police officers, teachers, should you be able to, do they deserve a free ride for college? And especially if you're a doctor, all the way to a doctorate, because you're already doing the public such a service by your career choice. So all around, generally, do you support universal healthcare? And for those, especially those specific public officials, universal college. I mean,
yeah, I knew what you meant. Yeah,
sorry.
I don't think that. So I don't think well, let's just be clear here. There's no such thing as free, right?
Yes, of course, taxes
there's free to me.
Yeah,
but even that's not free because I'm paying taxes for it, right? It's just it's you're not paying for it at point of use. So generally speaking, I think the Reform Party doesn't have a specifically written response on that. From the discussions that we've had internally, I think we're generally opposed to implementing a suddenly college is free and college debt is forgiven policy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, if you look at the inflationary pressures of university education, it's been incredible. College tuitions have risen at a rate that is a multiplier of the rate of inflation. And that is it's a supply and demand issue. It's because employers, in order to further differentiate the employment pool, have been adding on as decision makers the ability to have certain degrees that aren't actually required in order to do the jobs.
Yeah.
So they're artificially inflating the demand for university degrees. We really like Mike Rowe, I'll tell you that. We think that number one, not everybody has to go to university. Not everybody there's a lot of value and honor in working
doing it on your own
and working a vocation, and this and learning a trade skill and things like that. And I have a degree myself. I have an engineering degree.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My father never got a degree, but he's one of nature's natural engineers by mentality, but he never got the paper, right? And I have a lot of respect for him. He's an incredible person who can do anything he puts his mind to. And so from our standpoint, the idea of, I would say that we're probably opposed to universal free college education, or universally taxpayer funded college education. However, if you look at the history of college education, the public universities in most states used to be heavily subsidized by the state governments and were essentially free if you went to an in-state university and you got decent grades.
Yeah.
If you got decent grades and you got accepted to a state-run university, you could pretty much finish your degree with almost no debt historically, right?
Okay.
And what we've seen is the cost of universities have inflated dramatically over the years. Now, I talked to you about the demand pressures over university tuition. Let's talk about on the supply side, the ability for people to borrow incredible amounts of money for very low interest rates.
Yeah.
Because they were subsidized and guaranteed by the federal government, made lenders willing to loan incredible amounts of money to people going into university. And your average 18-year-old going into university is not thinking about whether they're going to be paying on these college loans 50 years from, they're not. I wasn't,
No.
They're thinking about, can I get into this university? Yay. How much is it going to cost? Oh, wow. Oh, I can get a loan and I don't have to pay for it until I graduate and get a good job. Great. Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll be fine.
I'll be fine.
I'll get my job and I'll pay it all off.
And anytime you unlink the cost from the opportunity, what happens? The money stops having as much meaning. The cost stops being as real, and people become willing to pay much more for that than they would if they actually stopped and had to sit down and plan out, well, how am I actually going to pay for this 20 years from now? How much money do I have to make a year to be able to afford these loan payments? How long am I going to have to pay? What's the total I'm going to cost? And so what you saw is that because the loans are guaranteed by the federal government and you can't discharge them with bankruptcy, then the lenders will loan to anybody, pretty much any amount. They don't care because there's zero risk to them. And they will loan you as much money as you ask for without really caring about whether you can pay it back or not. They'll let you go in the hole as far as you want to dig it. And so there's a disconnect there, again, because there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no due diligence over saying, okay, this person's going to university, their grades aren't so good, and they're getting a degree in high altitude basket weaving, which isn't going to pay anything when they graduate. Should I still be loaning them money? Yeah. And the answer is yeah, because I don't care. I'm going to get paid back anyway.
Yeah.
And and the person who's, going to college, they're just going to college. They're not necessarily thinking that far ahead. And so that part of the system is also broken. So I would say that the Reform Party's perspective would probably be something along the lines of, we think that we should return to inexpensive, basic university education, public university education should return to its roots of being a publicly funded service for people who are wanting to get, baseline degrees to begin a career, maybe actually make it up to associate's degree, maybe the community colleges. Yeah. But if you're going to do it, you also have to include vocational colleges. So we would say, state government subsidized vocational schools and community colleges. Yes. And then after you've proven your point there, then you can say, okay, now you're going to have to pay for the last 2 years at a state university, but they have to be able to transfer their credits, right?
Yeah.
You can't cut them off like that. Yeah. So something along those lines. And also, again, I think that there needs to be some sort of federal limit on the amount of money that you can borrow for college education based on your the degree that you're pursuing and its general average earning capacity and your basically your grades, right?
Yeah.
And if you do that, so that puts downward pressure, because right now the universities they can keep raising the tuition because people keep loaning the money.
Yeah. But
if you see that there are caps that start coming into play on the amount of money that the students can borrow, the universities will have to make the decision of losing student enrollment or lowering their prices.
I'd like to go to the more because we've been talking about college and after you graduate high school, but before you even enter kindergarten, does the Reform Party support universal pre-K? Because like many people would say, this is like the time of their lives where they're learning the most, and you want the most educated society as you can get, so start early.
I would say we would probably generally say that that's something that has to be decided on a state and locality basis. We're not big fans on large blanket federal programs, right? Okay. We believe that one of the beauties of having, the various states and state governments and localities and local governments is that if you find that the place where you live is not serving your needs, you have the ability to get up and relocate to another place, get a job in another city, get a job in another state. You can move. It's not always easy, right?
No.
It's not always easy, but it can be done, right? If you like Texas, if you don't like Texas, you can move to California. If you don't like California, you can move to Texas, right?
Yeah.
And you have a choice there of the type of government, the level of government involvement, the level of libertarian versus progressive kind of mindset that you want. And we like that. We think that that's important for Americans to have those kinds of choices. We take it one step further. So the Republicans give lip service to this, right?
Yeah.
They're all about, we're all about small government. No, you're not. You're about small federal government is what you are. The Republicans don't like big federal government. They love big state government. They want the state governments to tell you what to do, when to do, and how to do it. If you live in a red state, they want the government to be able to tell you, who you can date, who you can see, and what you can do, and all this other stuff. They're big fans of a lot of government regulation at the state level. Yeah. And here in Texas, we see that repeatedly, where the state government tells the county government they can't do X, Y, and Z. They tell the city governments they can't do X, Y, and Z. No. A good example, like internet service, right?
Yeah.
Actually, the state government in Texas passed is it in Texas? There's at least one state, and I think it's here in Texas.
Okay.
No. It was in Tennessee. Tennessee, a state government passed a law that told the city government that they could not have a city-funded fiber network.
Okay.
They passed a law to prevent the city, the people who work and live in that city who voted for it, from instituting a public service that they wanted. Now, if that's not big government, I don't know what is. Yeah. It's hypocrisy is what it is. So we actually believe in that. We believe that local government, the more local the government is, the more authority it should have over and more representative it should be of your interests. So that if you don't like what's going on at the local level, you should have the power to change it at the local level and not have to go to the state level or the federal level to get them to come and backfill for the fact that your local government doesn't want to do something.
It does make sense because, more than anything, the local government has to serve the interests of the people. Like it, instead of the state and federal who are such at an out, they're so far away from the actual people.
And big decisions and let's say this way, blanket programs, large blanket programs that try to be everything to everyone have big holes.
Okay.
They always have big holes in them. And so the more granular you can get, the more local you can get. Here's another good example, minimum wage laws. Okay. Yeah. A lot of places are, a lot of the Democrats are pushing for federal minimum wage increases. The Reform Party stance on that is that a federal minimum wage is a sledgehammer and is not a good tool for the kind of granularity that you need to actually serve people's needs, because any minimum wage you could institute that would be fair to people living in downtown Manhattan,
yes,
or downtown San Francisco, would be ridiculous for somebody living in rural Mississippi, because those two places have such high differences in cost of living that you can't make one rate that actually fits everybody like that.
No, yeah,
so that needs to be granular. It needs to be on a local socioeconomic basis based on the cost of living in that region.
Yeah. Like it is far more expensive to live in California than it is in significantly other states. So the minimum wage should probably be higher in California than it is in different states. So
let them set it at the state, or even better, really it should be set at the metropolitan level, in my opinion.
Another thing was that a lot of our teachers do not get enough supplies. They don't get enough money, honestly.
Yeah, I've seen it myself.
Wait, are you a teacher? Quick question. Or no, you said you're an engineer. Sorry.
I do training, development, and consulting for process industries.
But what would you do? What would the Reform Party do about the current teacher shortage we're having across the country? And how do we bring a lot of respect back to this profession? Like, everyone respects teachers, simply except for the government.
Well, so, and again, I can speak to my local experience, and I know that So education is, again, one of these issues where the differences that you see and the issues that drive education are so local that any kind of federal program is going to be problematic, because the focus and the funding and the problems that a school, a school in Fairfax, Virginia, for example, has, is going to be very, very different from the ones that are a rural public school in the middle of Arkansas, for example. They're going to have very, very different issues, very different cultural focus, and you just can't do, again, you can't do a one size fits all. Now, the Reform Party is not opposed to the idea of basic minimum standards for education. We believe that once you come out of the 12th grade, there should be some basic things that you should know how to do, right? There should be, and you should be primed at that point to then either go into the workforce, into a vocational or trade school, or into university, right? And we, the Republicans say no child left behind. We actually believe in that, right? We believe that no child should be left behind. Everybody should have the opportunity to excel. The opportunity. We can't guarantee equal outcomes, right?
Yeah.
But fundamentally, if you look at what's going on across the board, teachers are just not paid. They're not paid
Simply,
enough.
no.
I mean, anybody who's ever hired just a babysitter for their kid knows how expensive just having somebody who does nothing but watch your child is all day.
Yeah. And
yet they expect to get a professional to teach their children all day long for significantly less money, right? Yeah. And part of the problem is that, if you look at the way schools are funded through local property taxes in most places, right? And there's some state funding that comes down. There's an unevenness to how the schools are funded.
However, sorry to interrupt, but however, wouldn't you argue though that it is also on the federal government to provide more funding to the state and local areas?
If they were going to do that, they should basically be providing block grants. I mean, if you think about it, all the federal government really does is it pays for programs, but you could shift some of those programs to state management and then provide block funding for those purposes, and then let the state government be responsible for figuring out how to spend the money effectively.
Yeah. Now,
the Democrats generally don't want to do that because they don't trust the state. They don't trust the state government to spend it the way they want them to spend it, right? Because they have their ideas about what's actually good for the public, and I believe that they are doing the right thing. I'm not trying to demonize them for this, but they have their own particular views about what. But if you look at a state like Texas, it's deeply conservative and has specific ideas about how education funding should be spent. The question becomes, why shouldn't they be able to make that decision as long as they're getting the results, the base results that are expected, right?
Yeah.
And so it comes down to, if you're going to do that, yeah, sure. If you're doing that, what the federal government ends up doing is basically shuffling money. They take in tax dollars from different states and then they reallocate it slightly. Some of the poor states get more money per capita. Some of the wealthier states end up losing a little money per capita. That's the nature of a federal republic, right?
Yep.
And so if you do that and you provide that money to the states, and then the states provide it down to the local boards of education, then they have more freedom in how that money gets spent to actually address the problems of those individual schools, rather than saying, everybody gets X dollars per student for this program, whether you absolutely need it or not.
Yeah. So does the Reform Party support just giving the money to the states and letting them manage it? Like we're not
with oversight.
With oversight.
Okay. With oversight. Right. With oversight. Yeah, you can't, say, oh yeah, we gave the state of Texas $500 million for public education, and they used it to build a 500-foot tall statue of 500-foot tall statue of their favorite president in the center of the school.
Yeah,
no,
probably Reagan or something.
Not anymore. No, Reagan's considered a rhino these days within the Republican Party, right?
That's true if he was alive.
Oh yeah, he would never win the primary.
Yeah. A few other questions about education. This was another one about how would the Reform Party deal with the bus driving shortage we're currently dealing with? But I'm assuming it'd be similar to the answer you just said about the teachers.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that we had a bus driver shortage. Sorry. Which I guess I should have known better, because my sister's actually was a bus driver for a local public school in where she lives. So no, there's a bus driver shortage. I'm terribly sorry. I wasn't aware of that. We drop our kids off at the local school, so we haven't been affected by that.
Another thing was,
maybe I should be looking for a side job.
Another one was, this was very specific, and you might say, just leave this to the states. This was actually a question from one of my teachers that she wanted you to answer.
Excellent. By the way, we like teachers. We're big fans of teachers. Anybody who takes that as a profession, to build and grow young minds, we have a lot of respect. Teachers don't get nearly enough credit for the work that they do.
Yeah, and especially it seems where, like, the amount of disrespect they have gotten from the government over the years, you either get some of those like the greatest angel, or some of the worst type of people get into the profession.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that what we see is that a big problem with being a teacher these days, a big drain, is the fact that standardized testing has been overemphasized, overused. We're over testing the kids. We're testing too frequently. We're basing too much on standardized testing.
I personally agree as a student.
Yeah, and it takes up time, it takes up money, it takes up learning capacity, where they're basically the teachers and the administrations are forced to focus on teaching to pass the tests, and that's a horrible way to run an education system. Standardized tests are not good for measuring individual achievement. They might be great for measuring deltas between starting point and end point, or trying to see if there are general major gaps in a curricula. Okay, so that if you want to adjust your curricula, but they really shouldn't be. And I work in an industry where I've actually built testing and done some standardized testing in order to, but I understand that the purpose of that testing is to actually measure the effectiveness of the training, not the effectiveness of the students. And so, if you do that, if you start putting too much on these tests, you break the system. And then we also, I would also say that teachers don't get nearly enough support from their administrations. School administrations they're terrified of lawsuits. They're terrified of the parents, and they're under significant amounts of political pressure these days. The school boards have become horribly politicized.
Yeah.
And the teachers get stuck in the middle, and it's not fair.
You've likely seen the meetings that have blown up.
Yeah.
Another. Oh, but that question though from my teacher, Miss Arati, was, should there be so this used to be the law in Florida, that if a student missed more than 9 days in a semester, they automatically failed.
Wow.
She personally would like a return to that.
Really?
I personally do not think so, but
I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that's a good idea. I would say that if you're talking about unexcused absences, right? Not excused absences.
Yeah. So the only exceptions for serious illness or family tragedy.
Okay. Family tragedy. Okay. Well, that's reasonable, that part. But I would say that no, failing students for absences, excessive absences, is a bad idea. I think what you need is diversion programs. If a student is basically absent that much, that means that there's a serious problem.
Yeah.
And it's not a problem necessarily just with the school. It's a deeper problem that's going on. And that's what you need in situations like that is not automatically failing them. What good does that do? Oh, great. Now they get to take a school year over again where they'll skip school some more, right?
Probably.
Any kid that's having that kind of issues and missing that many classes, there's either something very, very troubling going on in their family life.
Yeah.
They may be the family may be suffering through financial hardship. They may have mental illness at home. There may be abuse at home. We don't know, right? They may have other kids are bullying them at school. Any one of a number of things could be causing that. Failing the kid, that's an easy out. We don't want them, we'll just fail and make them do it over again. That doesn't solve the problem. So you need something different in that situation. There needs to be a way of following up, finding what the underlying issue is, and if you can resolve that. And maybe, like I know here in our locality, our school district has one school that's specifically designed for kids who are troubled or having discipline issues or issues like that.
We also have that here.
Yeah, so they don't fail you, but you're going to go to a school where you have a lot less freedom to do what you want, and they're going to be watching you a lot more closely. And so I think that's frankly, a more reasonable approach.
Mm-hmm. Do you? I'm not 100% sure.
I'm really enjoying this, by the way.
Me too.
Very good. You're asking some very good and challenging questions. Some of the things that I haven't thought about in a while, and I'm having to go. What we've talked about this before. Do we have a formal stance on that? No, but what did we discuss, kind of thing. So we do a lot of internal debate. We have a very active internal forum for discussing current events and issues, and they can range all over the place.
Yeah. I was saying, even writing down all these questions, I realized I had so many more than I initially thought. So, and thank you so much for coming today.
No, it's my pleasure.
No. So I would like to focus on the economy, because it's, another gigantic issue.
Yep.
So right now,
that's our bread and butter, right?
Right now, many experts are saying we're experiencing what's called as the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
And so, there's so many things going on right now. Like, you see, union attempts for unionization at both like Amazon and Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And then, so how has the Reform Party shown solidarity with these workers? And also, what is your plan? How do you get, because many of these workers have, they work too many hours. They haven't been treated well for years. Mm-hmm. And so how do you bring them, how do you bring the trust back to these corporations? And what fundamental change would the Reform Party make?
Wow. That's not the direction I thought that part of the conversation was going to go.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, so now that's a very specific. We actually had a conversation just recently about whether we would put an explicit statement in a social media post about whether we support unions or not, and we opted to defer that because we wanted to talk about it some more internally. I will say that, generally speaking, we are very supportive, much more supportive of workers' rights, of individual workers' rights, than we are of, say, large corporate rights, right? Yeah. And we consider ourselves to be in many ways centrist populist, right?
Yeah.
Or call us rational populists, as opposed to some of the things that we've seen. And so we're very much on the side of the working class, blue collar, white collar folks, and very much less on the limousine riding CEOs, right? And so I would say that we are supportive of the right of individual employees to collectively bargain for good working conditions, especially for good working conditions. We have seen, obviously, that unions can be abused. I personally, I'll give you my personal life experience. I worked when I was in college. I worked at two summer jobs. One was in a manufacturing plant that had no union and desperately needed it because the management treated their employees like absolute hot garbage.
I'm so sorry.
Just zero respect. Oh no, I didn't care. I was a college student, and I was only there for 3 months, so I was kind of immune to it. If they fired me, I wasn't.
I'll be fine.
I was going to roll off my back. I'm going to go back to college in a month, right? What do I care, right? Although they fired me, great. And then I worked in another plant, a manufacturing plant, where they had a union, and they would file a grievance at the drop of a hat for anything. They used it as a crutch to get things that they frankly probably didn't deserve in some cases. And so that factory ended up shutting down. Now we can't say whether it was because of that, but it certainly didn't help. And so unions are, I think, are a two-edged sword, right? You can have, we believe in the rights of workers to collectively gather together and fight for better working conditions, for better pay, things like that. We actually support that. We don't necessarily believe that unions have always been focused actually on that there have been, and we know that, in some of the bigger cities, right, unions became involved in organized crime and things like that.
And the mafia.
And so there's
JFK was elected in a very precarious way.
Right. So we're a little wary of making just a blanket pro-union
Yeah,
statement, but
which is
we are
understandable. It's a very
right,
complicated issue.
right. But we are in favor of the rights of individual employees to collectively
Yeah.
negotiate. So it's to collectively negotiate for their working conditions and hours and pay and things
Yeah.
like that.
Well, when you see people like, like Amazon workers, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming you've heard the stories about like
Oh
the
yeah,
horrendous conditions they've had to deal with.
carrying bottles around because they can't make it to the bathroom, things like
That is
that. Yeah,
insane.
that is insane. Yes.
But do you think that, like, because you see nominal support by Democrats and Republicans
Mhm.
about this issue,
Mhm.
but do you think they're really doing enough? Like, do you think that they're, and I think that's something where I think the Reform Party could definitely take a hold in, where you're out there actually campaigning with these people and building that relationship, much stronger than, a president saying, it's the right, or like, just
Yeah.
nominal support.
I don't know. I mean, it's part of the problem is that there's a complacency among the folks that work at places like whenever
Yeah.
whenever money's tight and the market is tight and it's hard to get jobs, people are understandably wary of rocking the boat too much, and so it's hard to get people motivated to join a union. And yeah, we saw that Amazon did some somewhat shady stuff, right?
Yeah.
Putting ballot boxes where cameras were focused so they could see whether you voted or not, some stuff like that. And so from that standpoint, I would say that I don't know, other than the role the government has in making sure that the company's management plays fair in allowing workers to discuss and vote on union, forming a union or not. I think that anything a company does to try to thwart that, or shame people into not joining it, or blackmail them and not joining the unions and stuff, I think that is a legitimate role of government to police that and prevent that from happening. I think that the workers have the right to join a union if they want to join a union.
Yeah.
But I think that they need to be be able to make that decision whether that's something that they want to choose or not, right?
But when you see, these workers actually standing up, and you agree that their conditions are harsh, should the Reform Party be out there campaigning with them and fighting for them?
I am not able to make that assertion on my own. So I would have to discuss that with the rest of the national party, and that may even be one of those things where we say, no, that's going to be a local issue. We're going to leave that up to the local parties, because just as we believe that the federal government, should defer to state governments on many things and leave power to them, and the states could be local. So the Reform Party National Committee sets the national platform, and that's not the end all be all. And there's a lot of details that we believe are local issues that the state parties have to set their own platform on and decide which way they want to go. And there are many issues that we have that are like that, where we're choosing not to put it in our national platform because we want to leave the state parties free to decide where they want to land on that.
Which makes a lot of sense to me. Like, that's the position of the local and state reform parties to get involved with. Another thing though is just the amount of the inflation that the country's been dealing with the past year has been insane. And there's many reasons why this is happening.
Yes, it's very complicated. Yeah,
it's a very complicated issue.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to put you on a spot.
People don't like complicated, right?
No.
People want simple answers. They want to blame it on the president, whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, right? They want to blame it on the president. They want to say, oh, it's the president's fault that we have high unemployment, or that the country shut down, or that we don't have a vaccine, or that the inflation's high.
Do you think the government response is acceptable right now? Like what would the Reform Party do different if they were in power? With all the crises going on,
Yeah. That is a good question, and a very complicated question. So the problem with current inflation is that very much it's chickens coming home to roost. The Reform Party stance on a lot of these economic issues, everybody wants a solution now for a problem now. When let me tell you that the facts on economics are, if you change tax policy, it can take 2 years for the economic consequences of that to actually become clear. If you go out and do a whole bunch of spending programs, it can take years for you to determine whether or not you screwed up or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a fundamental issue that the Republicans and the Democrats are short-sighted, short-term, knee-jerk thinkers and behaviors.
Yeah.
They behave in the short term, and they do whatever will get them elected this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between them and the Reform Party is the Reform Party stance is that we have long-term systemic problems
Yeah.
that cannot be fixed in one election cycle, cannot be fixed in one presidential term of office,
Mm-hmm.
and cannot be fixed frankly, cannot be fixed in one decade. These are long-term systemic issues with taxation and spending and budgets, with Social Security and services and military spending that require long incremental changes to fix them. And a good example of that is the inflation. The inflation that we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it's natural, and it is a result of a rebound from a really, really bad recession, right? An artificial recession from the entire country getting locked down, entire world being locked down, disrupted supply chains, businesses having to cut operations, or stop operations for
many
months
small businesses never reopened.
Right. And so what happened is that during that era when things were dropping, there were two things that went on. Some people were continuing to get paid. They were still working, they were still getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
But because goods were becoming scarce, supply chains were disrupted.
Yeah.
The scarcity of goods meant you had more dollars chasing fewer goods, right? And we all know how that ends. The second thing that happened is the government dumped money essentially
Mm-hmm.
to try to help people, right? They dumped all these checks to try to help people to deal with the pandemic.
Quick question: did the Reform Party support the stimulus checks?
I would say that the Reform Party did not support blanket stimulus checks.
Okay.
Not blanket stimulus checks. We know that the PPP loan program and the other program as well were horribly managed. We know that the stimulus checks were given out as blanket checks rather than needs-based.
Okay.
I guess, my wife and I during the pandemic, we were lucky enough to be able to keep working.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't lose our jobs. And we got stimulus checks on top of that.
Which is amazing.
Which was amazing. It was like free money out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
Except that it's not free money, is it? It's somebody's money. And guess whose money it is? It's our money, because that extra money that flooded out into the system at a time when some people used it because they'd lost their jobs and needed to pay their rent. And that's the good side, right? That kept them from losing their houses or losing their apartment, right? They were able to make basic life decisions with that money. But that's not everybody who got money. There were a lot of people who got that money that didn't need it. And now they've got money sitting in their pockets that they didn't have before, didn't expect to have. And the scarcity of goods means that you've got more and even more money chasing more scarce goods, so that when the economy starts ramping back up and they start feeling comfortable, suddenly everybody's trying to spend that money. And everybody knows how that ends. That's one of the primary pressures that causes inflation, is when you have production ramping up more slowly than the money supply, right?
Okay.
And so, they created a problem then. So our answer is, if we want to fix the inflation, the answer is not to do that, right? Now, how do you fix it now? Well, unfortunately,
it's already happened.
There's not a lot you can do now other than kind of ride it out and take steps to try to cap it off somewhat. And the way you do that, obviously, is through standard monetary policy, right? You start restricting the availability of money in the economy. You start to unheat the economy a little bit. Now it's fixing to get even weirder now, because with the spike that we're going to see in oil price, are seeing and are going to continue to see in oil prices, that's going to ripple through the entire economy. We're going to see increased prices for food, because the supply of wheat, potatoes, and some other farm goods are going to be impacted. There's a lot going to go on there. Yeah.
Did the Reform Party support President Biden's banning of Russian oil?
Have we specifically talked about the oil embargo? I think that I don't know that we have made an official stance on that yet. We've been talking a lot about it because it's a very one of the things you're going to find about the Reform Party is that we're a little more careful about mouthing
Yeah.
off about stuff like this. We're not going to divert the question, and we're not going to not answer you and give you a whole bunch of vague,
Yeah.
generalizations. We're actually going to try to answer the question that you asked us.
Which
But
I'm glad.
that-
You don't
that
seem like
also
the
means-
typical. You don't seem like
Yeah.
the typical politician, which
Right. But
I
that
mean in
also-
a very good way.
Well, thank you. But that also means, though, if we don't know the answer, we're going to say we're not comfortable with that yet, right? And we've talked about it, we know about it, and the problem with it is that do we believe that Russia needs to be further punished and deterred from continuing along the path that they're going? Yes, absolutely. That's easy, right? That's an easy answer.
Mhm.
And we know that hydrocarbons are one of Russia's biggest sources of revenue. And if we don't cut off the flow of hydrocarbons coming out of Russia, then they're going to continue to use those profits to fund their efforts. And they're going to continue to basically be able to hold the line and continue to do what they're doing in Ukraine.
Mhm.
On the flip side, the oil economy, global oil economy, is a global oil economy, and you
Mhm.
can't insulate yourself from it.
Yeah.
And basically,
You're hurting your own people.
embargoing Russian oil is the same thing as if OPEC put a global embargo on the sale of oil.
Yeah.
And we all know how that went in the 70s, right?
Yeah,
So
it was a massive disaster in the Carter administration.
it was a massive disaster to the Carter administration. And so, the lesson learned there is that the reality is, and my wife and I were just talking about that this morning. The reality is that you can't unlink the American economy from the global oil price,
Mhm.
even though the United States is more or less energy self-sufficient.
Mhm.
We produce about 20% of the world's hydrocarbon products, and we consume about 20% of the world's hydrocarbon products.
Mhm.
Now, it's not the same stuff. We
Yeah.
do a lot of swapping. We export some sweet crude and import some sour crude. We export some heavy crude. We import some light crude. The other way around. We export some light crude, import some heavy crude. So we do some horse trading.
Mhm.
That's why you see that we actually do buy Russian crude, because we're selling some of our crude over here and we're buying some Russian crude over there.
Yeah.
But in the end, the balance is that we're actually relatively energy self-sufficient,
Mhm.
relatively hydrocarbon self-sufficient. But we are also a free market. And that means
Yeah.
that the price of oil goes up everywhere else. Our oil producers have a pressure to sell oil to them,
Mhm.
who will pay more. So that means the price of domestic oil goes up. We're not insulated from that. If we want to have, from our perspective, I think the Reform Party stance is that global dependence on hydrocarbons from some particularly unrepresentative governments,
Mhm.
and let's just be frank here, the majority
Dictatorships.
the majority of the oil producing nations in the world do not have governments that are beholden to their own people or anyone else.
Yes.
And that is a problem, because it gives them an incredible amount of power over the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And until we can find a way to be energy globally, be in the Western world, at least the
Mhm.
representative republics, until we can find a way to be energy independent of those
Yeah.
those countries, then we're a little bit at their whim. There's
How
a
do
national security risk there, right? Economic and security risk.
So it's clear that the Reform Party does not like working with dictators. And the energy, being energy efficient,
Mhm.
I think also kind of starts leading us to climate change.
Yep.
Which one does the Reform Party believe that climate change exists and that it's because of human impact?
I would say that the vast majority of the Reform Party members do believe that climate change exists. They do believe that it is while there is some natural components to it,
Mhm.
that it is also being heavily impacted by human factors,
Yeah.
by the use of fossil fuels and other things like that. Yes.
Does the Reform Party support using nuclear power?
I believe that generally speaking, we do. I haven't heard anybody say that they
Mhm.
are opposed to the use of nuclear power. In fact, several of we had some internal debate. Several of the leaders
Mhm.
have expressed that Germany really shot themselves in the foot
It really did.
because the Greens got in power in heavily influenced in Germany and said, we hate nuclear power, we want to shut down all the nuclear power plants, and they were like, okay, but we don't have anything to replace it with just yet.
Mhm.
And so they start phasing all the nuclear power plants out. Meanwhile, France is over there sitting pretty, going, we believe you have making a mistake, monsieur.
I think because, the Reform Party seems as a very cautious party. It sees all these gigantic problems, but it doesn't, and some people might even blame you. Like some people might even be like, no, we need dramatic change. That's the only
Yes,
way to stop
right.
these dramatic problems.
That's
or
right.
you're like, no, I don't want to cause more issues.
Right.
Attempting to alleviate the current ones.
Right.
But the thing with climate change, though, as decades of non-policy, by the, Nixon did create the EPA, but we've known it since the Nixon administration, the Carter, Reagan, all these different administrations.
Right.
The United States has not changed the way how it does, in lots of ways, like dramatic, fundamental change.
West Texas, Texas is one of the nation's #1 producers of wind and solar power. We're huge, we're big on solar and wind, and we have nuclear power plants on top of that. We're also big on obviously oil production as well. Yeehaw, right?
Yeah.
So I would say that the United States has made some pretty dramatic strides in improving water quality, air quality. I mean, you look at what was the old story about the year that the I can't remember which river it was in was it in Ohio, where the river caught on fire, and was the impetus for the EPA, I think.
Yeah.
Or the Clean Water Act. We've made huge inroads in environmental quality, in the United States.
Yeah.
One of the problems I feel like that we face in the United States is that there's a lot of resistance in the business industry, and the business industry can be a very powerful lobby because stricter environmental regulations mean higher operating costs. And in the United States is we are a bastion of business, right?
Yes.
Everybody knows this. So we feel like that we have to find ways to work smarter on that and get business interested in doing the right things instead of just basically, because the reason why we're more kind of cautious about this stuff, and we don't generally go for the dramatic changes, is simply because we're really tired of the metronome effect. And what you see when you have a bipolar political system like we do right now.
So you mean go like back and forth.
When you have a bipolar political system, it exaggerates the influence of the more extreme elements of both parties, and that's a problem.
Yes.
And you tend to not be able to actually fashion policy. You get no consistency. And how can you make economic decisions and political decisions and national security decisions if you're changing your freaking mind every 2 to 4 years?
Yeah.
If you're swinging back and forth, who can trust us?
Yeah.
What can businesses trust us? The Keystone Pipeline is off, and then it's on, and then it's off, and then it's on. How can you trust that kind of business environment? One of the most important things for a nation to prosper is somewhat to have some stability, some predictability, to know what the laws are and how to actually comply with those laws, to be able to predict 10 years ahead that if you make this big investment, that it's not going to come back and bite you later.
Yeah.
Right. That's how you get actual prosperity and growth that way.
Well,
and so go ahead.
Well, I do agree with you. The biggest problem, is that, are more or less bipolar.
It very much is bipolar, and with all that goes along with that in the healthcare manual.
You agree though that let's say a Reform Party president gets elected 2024 or something.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that president still be like, no, I disagree with these things that have already been agreed to by the previous administration? So while America definitely would prosper from consistency, is it also unfair to force the political parties who disagree with what the previous administrations have done, like
Mhm.
for them to continue those same policies.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, but the problem is that from our perspective, what happens is that, let's say that the solution is here.
Mhm.
This is the happy medium. This
Yeah.
is the balancing point for hitting that right point
Yeah.
between business interests
Mhm.
and the public interest, right?
Mhm.
And the Republicans think that business interests are public interests,
Yes, which
and
is not true.
and the Democrats think that they're never, right? And
Mhm.
so you've got so the reality is that everything has a price,
Mhm.
everything has consequences, and so you have to think about where is that balance point where we make. Had we started this 10 years ago
Yeah.
and started setting up a course here, we could have been further down the road and not be fighting over it every 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Whereas the Republicans, they go here and they say, "Oh yeah, we're going to cancel all this,"
Yeah.
and then the Democrats get off. "Oh, we're putting it all back. No,
Yeah.
we're going to cancel it. No, we're putting it all back." And so our standpoint is that, okay, we're not going to do that,
Mhm.
but yes, we're going to go in there and we're going to put back in place some of the things that the Democrats probably would have asked for.
Yeah. Some things that the
Albeit,
Republicans would have asked for.
and probably take away some of the things the Republicans want to get rid of.
Mhm.
And then we're going to look at them both and say, okay, you guys can sit there and basically use each other your foil
Mhm.
to blame everything on if you want. But if we
Mhm.
get a Reform Party candidate in office in the White House, or
Yeah.
we get 2 or 3 senators, good grief, can you imagine the power? Look at the power that Joe Manchin has in the
Yeah.
U.S. Senate right now.
Imagine the
And
power one Reform Party senator would have.
yeah, or Murkowski, right?
Mhm.
Imagine a Murkowski and a Manchin, but Reform Party candidates having that swing vote in
Yeah.
Congress and being able to tell the Republicans and the Democrats, you guys are done pointing your fingers at each other as a way to basically blame each other for the fact that you can't get anything done. Now you're going to come to the table, and we're going to align with whichever block is being rational right now.
Yeah.
So you want the Senate majority? Come talk to us. Oh, that lasted about a month before you started acting like imbeciles. Guess what? We're walking across the aisle to the other party.
Well, I definitely agree with you. I also would say though that okay, would the Reform Party Senate candidates, congressional candidates,
Yeah.
would they promise to not caucus with the other two parties? Because that seems
Absolutely
what
not.
has happened
No,
when
absolutely
other
not.
independents have been elected.
No, you
Like,
have to. You have to
Angus King
caucus.
of Maine
Right.
caucuses with Democrats, and that's mostly due to chairmanship in a lot of ways.
Right.
Because
You
they're
have
like,
to.
I'm an independent, but the thing is, I have more power if I'm on this committee.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. But the problem that you see with Angus King and with Susan Collins and with
Mhm.
Lisa Murkowski is that those candidates still have a relatively clear ideological bent to the left or the right,
Yeah.
and they can't, because of their own supporters, they really can't
Mhm.
jump across the aisle. Okay, they really can't allow themselves to, because they probably wouldn't get reelected if they did that once.
Mhm.
From our standpoint, a Reform Party candidate, an elected Reform Party official
Mhm.
in that situation would actually make it a point of going to each of the parties and saying, okay, which one of you folks wants the majority?
Yeah. It is a lot of sway.
And here are our 10 bullet points of the policies that we want enacted.
Mhm.
And you both have the opportunity to be in the driving seat for these
Mhm.
policies. But we're not going to let you run roughshod. You're going to put
Awesome.
us on the committees. We're going to have a big say in what gets done here and how it gets done. And if we see you pushing things that don't conform with what we're looking for, we will break your majority in a heartbeat, and we'll walk across the aisle to the other party. We're going to get some business done.
And I definitely agree with you that only a handful of congressmen could do that, as we've seen that in the 2010 Tea Party wave, how only a handful of congressional Republicans do it.
Yep.
And there's a lot of pressure on much of the progressive, or many people would call them the squad, like that they could have tanked Nancy Pelosi's speakership if they really wanted to.
That's right. That's right. They have an outsized influence. Another interesting thing, Texas has a very interesting mechanism. So in Texas, at the Texas legislature, the speaker, the heads of the two can't remember if it's just, it may just be the House.
Okay.
The head of the House, the Texas House, is elected by the majority of the members of the House, regardless of party.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That's
So, yeah. And the national legislature, whichever party has the majority, gets
Yeah.
together, ignores the other group completely, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
votes in who they want. And as a result, what you get is you get a bulldog for that party who represents the median or even the loudest voices in that party, right? Or the swing votes in that party. Whereas in the Texas House, what you get
Mhm.
is you can actually get a candidate that is much more representative of the legislature as a whole,
Yeah.
because they might get a whole bunch of Republicans and a few Democrats, or a whole bunch of Democrats and a few Republicans, just enough to swing it. And you usually end up with much more moderate leadership in the Texas House than you do in the federal government, and much more than you do in the Senate as well.
A few more questions.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I so in 1999, and I'm not sure how much the Reform Party wants to associate with former Governor Ventura, as he is now a member of the Green Party.
Well, Mr. Ventura has been everything at this point, but yes.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. He famously said he considered being Trump or Bernie's vice president.
Yeah. I don't know how you do that. But okay.
But Ventura in 1999 as governor said that the Reform Party to him was a socially liberal and fiscally conservative party.
Mhm.
One, would you say that's still true? And two, in 2016 at a CNN town hall, because I think this is one thing that I think the Reform Party is having a gigantic struggle, as I see as an outsider view.
Mhm.
You see yourself as a centrist party, and as much as you, and I'm not trying to disrespect libertarians, as I know they will be mad at me, as they will argue that libertarianism is his entirely own ideology.
Right.
But to most of the public, they see them as a centrist party. And Gary Johnson on a CNN town hall in 2016 said that the libertarians are socially liberal, fiscally conservative. So what would you say are like the reform, like what does the Reform Party disagree with that the libertarian agrees with?
Mhm.
You know, because, and why vote reform instead of libertarian? Because you definitely have a lot of overlap, I would argue.
There is some overlap, but less than you would think, actually.
Okay.
And I can tell you where those differences are. So to your first comment about whether the Reform Party is, I apologize for the background noise. They're doing some work apparently next door.
That's fine.
So I would say that the Reform Party, Governor Ventura was not quite correct in that. I would say that the Reform Party is economically conservative, fiscally conservative.
Yeah.
That's the way I like to do it. Fiscally conservative and socially diverse.
Okay.
That I would say we range on social issues. We range from left of center to right of center.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are more socially conservative and more socially liberal within the Reform Party. The differentiator for us is that we don't believe that social issues should form the core focus of the party.
Okay.
And that they should, nor that they should serve as the primary focus of the government either. Yeah. So in some ways, we are a somewhat libertarian light on social issues, in that we believe that the government should take a little more of a hands-off approach and let people kind of live their lives the way they want to live. That doesn't mean that we are proponents of more socially liberal ideas, but we're also not opponents of socially liberal ideas as a party. Okay, so from that standpoint, comparing us to the libertarians themselves, I would say that the difference between us and the libertarians is the libertarians, number one, Gary Johnson is not really much of not really a what I would call your standard libertarian.
Yeah, I know some were very mad about his nomination.
They were a lot. Yes, that's right, and that's because the core of the Libertarian Party is very aggressively opposed to government intervention and regulation of business under any circumstances. Okay, they just the idea of any kind of government, big government, any kind of government programs, government regulation of business and trade and things like that, they very much oppose that. And the Reform Party stance is that the government has a responsibility to manage things like trade, and to manage things like the business environment for the good of the public interest. To a more of a degree, significantly less of a degree than maybe the Democrats do,
Mhm.
but definitely significantly higher than because libertarians are all hardcore free traders.
Yeah,
As far as they're concerned, if you offshore all the jobs, the
that's
system will
fine.
correct itself, and that's fine. That's the way that the system works, right?
Mhm.
And the Reform Party stance is, if you offshore all the jobs, that's a national security risk.
Yeah.
That's economic suicide. If you create free trade agreements with nations that are authoritarian,
Mhm.
and 3/4 of their business are owned by the military,
Mhm.
then that's not free trade. That's a disaster in the making.
Yeah.
We believe that if companies are becoming, if companies are offshoring wealth, then they're not doing. These are things that you're not doing right by the American public, the citizens. The government is there to serve the citizens, and it has an obligation to serve as a gatekeeper, a final kind of arbiter to
Mhm.
ensure that frankly, the business community is not destroying the country in the process of making a buck.
Yeah.
And the libertarians would never agree with those statements.
No. Quick question. Just a moment, please.
Yes, sir.
All right. So so on like socially liberal issues though,
Mhm.
is the Reform Party, would you define it as because to me, pro-choice is very broad.
Yeah.
Like, because, what are you talking about? Like, are you talking about like first trimester, second trimester, third trimester?
Right.
What's the differences?
Right.
So what would you go with? I'll go with, so what's because personally, I'm just looking at the time and I know I got
We don't
about
have a stance. We don't have a stance on that issue as a
on
party.
abortion.
Nope.
There's no stance.
Nope. Not as a party. Not at the national level, for sure.
Not the national level.
Our
I find that quite
candidate,
interesting.
our candidates have taken various stances over time.
Okay.
Perot stated. I'll tell you. This is what we kind of the approach we take with our candidates.
Yes.
Perot was asked multiple times what his stance on abortion was.
Mhm.
And they kept bugging him. He said, I don't want to answer that question. That's not my
Mhm.
focus. I don't want to answer that question. It's not my focus.
Okay.
And finally, one time they finally asked him and he said, he basically said, I believe in a woman's right to choose. Now, can we move back onto the other issues?
Yeah.
He didn't put it on his website. He didn't go on truck parades around the country talking about how strongly pro-life or pro-choice he was.
Okay.
He didn't do all those things. He said it simply. He made the statement one time, and he ran on the other issues that also affect the country as a whole. Those were his focus, and we believe that's where the party should be, and that from our standpoint, we would be accepting of a candidate that was willing to basically accept generally the status quo on issues like that and focus on the ticking time bombs that we're facing with respect to Social Security, with respect to the economy,
inflation,
and all of these other things, and education and all these other things, and not try to burn. I mean, the amount of energy, how much energy and time. And I understand that from a person. There's a saying. Terry Pratchett, passed away several years ago. Fantasy novelist, wrote the Discworld series, and one of his characters had a statement. He said, "Personal isn't the same thing as important."
That's true.
And by that, he meant that what's important to me isn't necessarily what I should be focusing on for everybody else. And while, I recognize that the concepts of pro-choice and pro-life are deeply personal and deeply important to individuals on a personal basis and deeply impactful to them.
Okay.
That as a party, we believe that there should be other mechanisms for advocating for that. And we see the Republicans and the Democrats, how much energy,
they
look
spend
at what
so much time.
and all they're doing is just they sit there and slap each other upside the head over this, and they shift it this way and they shift it back the other way. And it's like this tug of war over people's bodies and over people's rights and over something that frankly it's a deeply personally ethical discussion, right? And so from our standpoint, we don't want the national party or even the state parties really, or our candidates to get wrapped up into this debate. And we want them to focus on the other issues and stop trying to shove everybody around on this issue. Let's let that issue lie for a while, and try to resolve it more gradually and more carefully than trying to win a war.
I understand why you don't want it is a very divisive issue. And I also feel like it has always had a middle ground approach that most Americans agree with, but then the other side just kind of be like, no, they're all the way pro-choice or they're all the way pro-life. And then
Correct.
that leads to people be like, no, that's wrong then,
Yeah.
So, and I do agree that like, to a certain extent, abortion doesn't matter because the court's already decided in Roe v. Wade, but then you have Republicans now trying to reverse Roe v. Wade. So
Right.
it has really, brought the issue continuously back up.
Right. And I can guarantee you that if the Republicans actually managed to reverse Roe v. Wade, they would start looking for the next step in the process.
Yeah.
What else? How else can we restrict? What else can we restrict along these
How
lines?
far can we go?
How far can we push it? Because
Yeah.
in the end, it's a very valuable wedge issue for them.
Yeah. It is. It is weird talking when Republicans talk about rights, because it's like only a few decades ago they tried to they supported a constitutional amendment against gay marriage, and also with like the Reform Party's position on that. I know Perot was the first major candidate to ever support gay marriage.
Mhm.
Is that still the platform? And
Right. Again, we don't have a stance specifically at the national level on that.
okay.
We're more or less leaving that up to the candidates to define their stance on,
Okay.
and the individual members of the Reform Party to determine their stance on. I can tell you that I don't know of anybody personally in the party who has expressed an opposition to that. But
Is it
that may just because they're not talking about it. I don't know.
Okay. Is it because of the I might be wrong on the Supreme Court case that decided this in 2015? Wasn't it Oliver versus Hodge or something like that? I might be wrong, but is it because the Supreme Court has already ruled on this issue where it's like there's no point to talk about it?
Right. And most issues like that, I would say that we're comfortable letting the courts make the decisions and not politicizing it. How's that? It's probably a better way to express it. We're more generally fairly comfortable letting the courts work these issues out based on precedent, based on current law, and we're not out to go on a crusade one direction or the other.
Would the 14th Amendment allows, due process rights, and has more or less been referred to as, the Equality Amendment, like pretty much everyone's equal under the law. But many politicians who then go on to support, they're like, I am all about the Constitution. They're like, that doesn't apply to a certain
they have creative interpretations. They have creative interpretations of what the 14th Amendment means, right?
So do you believe the 14th Amendment applies to the LGBTQ community, or not? I don't really care that much about your personal opinion, but the party's opinion.
Again, that's going to be an area where we really haven't focused heavily, because we're kind of a rising tide lifts all ships. And so we've been so heavily focused on things that we see as frankly deeply potentially destructive issues that will destroy kind of the entire fabric of the country.
Okay.
And those tend to be heavily socioeconomic. They tend to be things like poverty. They tend to be things like the public debt.
It makes sense to me that like you wouldn't want to talk about what many would deem cultural war issues when there's so much more important things.
And the problem is, so under our current system, no one party can match your views exactly on every issue, right? True. And so everybody makes a decision of which issues that they care about most, and how they align with the party that they choose to affiliate with, right? And so it doesn't mean you don't care, because I have very strong personal views about all those issues that you just raised. Very, very strong views about each of those. And actually, you and I probably are of a similar mind on the issue of abortion as an example, pro-choice, pro-life. We probably agree, but that's not how I've chosen to align myself politically, because I think that as important as those things are, that if we don't resolve these other issues, you're going to see so much misery and so much poverty across such a wide swath of the country that it's our, it's going to be, we want to solve those problems. And if we can get those resolved, we'll be more than happy to then start talking about these other issues as well.
Oh, so sorry. Mr. Mansell gave me
We got a
something.
question. Yes, we have a question from the audience.
Okay. Wait, could you just wait 1 second? Sorry.
Sure.
Right. So our camera is about to die and we're
Okay.
gonna go get another battery.
Okay.
So we just want to hold on a second.
Sure.
Wait.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll still be recording the audio for this portion.
I'm going to get checking my email and messages and such.
Okay, it's perfectly fine.
I should probably message the executive committee and go, hey, da, 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 da. What do you think about this issue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was about to ask you about your personal life, but then I thought that was kind of messed up to not. Because
don't mind.
it wouldn't get
Go
the
ahead.
visuals, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, that's the part you don't want to see. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I might not answer.
How did you join the Reform Party and why?
So it was the 2000 election.
Oh, were you?
I had just graduated. It was 2000. I graduated from college in '94. I hadn't been, I'd voted in several of the elections. I'd gone to Tulane University. I had voted in a couple of elections in New Orleans after that, but really not paid much attention at that point.
Yeah.
So I was in my late 20s and newly married. 2000 elections coming up, and I'm like, wow, I really should start paying attention to politics, right?
Yeah.
And so I looked at the two candidates that we had,
Al Gore and George Bush.
And I hated both of them. I said, these guys, I don't like either of these guys.
Stink.
Yeah, well, I really don't want to, I really don't want another Bush, and I really don't want Al Gore either. And I said, surely there's another choice out there, right? So I said, and I said, yeah, the Reform Party, that was the Ross Perot party. I should go out and check those guys out.
Yeah.
So I checked, I looked, so I was like all excited, right? Because I remembered Ross Perot. I'd voted for him,
really?
Yeah. So I was really excited. So I looked him up and I'm like, Pat Buchanan? Oh man, what happened here? I was so incensed and so offended and completely bewildered by how they ended up nominating Pat Buchanan.
Oh my God.
And I started researching what had happened and basically came to the realization that it was essentially a hostile corporate takeover is what had happened. And it kind of started researching. In the process, I found a couple of the people who were Perot era members and still around, and contacted them and started talking to them and kind of like it was a conversation very similar to the one you're having with me today. And so had these long conversations with them about issues and everything, and basically just decided that Mr. Buchanan notwithstanding, the party itself was still full of the kind of people that I wanted to associate myself with, as politically. They were very diverse, but very in general kind of centrist. And they were trying their best to kind of get the party back, pull the party back from the Pat Buchanan kind of supporter kind of mentality. And so I joined in 2001 around the same time that I moved to Texas, and got involved in my local county party and ended up in charge of the local county party after not too long. And then most of Buchanan supporters started bailing around 2001 as soon as I saw that he wasn't going to do anything. Thankfully, and we managed to get the party realigned back to the original core principles. In fact, at the my first convention was the 2002 National Convention.
Okay.
And I went there, and one of the first votes that they held was to revert the platform back
Back
to the
to
1998
96.
platform.
Huh.
Back to the 98 platform. So they
Mhm.
basically just rolled time back. And I remember
Mhm.
the chairman of the convention said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have gone back in time." So everybody was very happy about that. It was a lot
Yeah.
of applause because they had added pro-life planks to the platform and all sorts of other stuff.
Quick question.
Yes,
Is
sir.
there any way, do you know, is there clips of that?
Of that convention?
Yes. Because I would love to hear that. Because
I don't know if I have video of that anywhere or not.
okay.
There's some articles that I've kept, and I actually have one of my good friends. Her name is Donna Shankle. She's
Mhm.
a retiree in Florida now, and she's not very active at this
Okay.
time. But she's given me her scrapbooks and everything,
Yeah.
and it was just an absolute gold mine of Reform Party memorabilia. I would be happy to share some of that with you.
All right. I would love to have that.
Yeah, I'll send you at least some images of it, right?
Thank you
Some
so
images,
much.
so you can
Yeah.
and you can pick what you want, higher quality scans of, and I'll be happy to send that
Yeah.
to you.
Because how this documentary that me and Mr. Mansell are working on
Mhm.
is we've recorded some of the initial first part where it's more or less me just talking about the entire history of the Reform Party from 1992, Ross Perot's origins, all the way to 2021. And then the second part's this interview of like, where's the party today?
Yeah,
Like
right,
what is,
right.
because, the Reform Party has changed a lot on, especially between that 2000, which I would say 2004 time period, because, Ralph Nader received the nomination.
That was a calculated decision on our part, by the way.
Yeah, which I
But
assumed because he did not seem to agree with, I would say,
he was
like,
he was
the
definitely much more
platform.
socially, much more greeny socially. He wasn't quite Green Party, but he was definitely more towards the Green Party than he was towards
Mhm.
the Reform Party edge. But really, it was a calculated decision on our part. He needed the ballot lines. We had the ballot lines, and what we were trying to do, because we
Yeah.
had been tarred with the Pat Buchanan brush,
Yeah.
and people were calling us people started calling us a far right wing party because of that.
Yeah.
And we basically set out to prove them wrong
Which,
by
which wasn't that far off, if we're being 100% honest. Like David Duke was a member of the Reform Party.
no,
I thought he was. I thought he was part of Buchanan's campaign.
maybe so, but he was not a Reform Party member. No.
Yeah, I didn't mean like elected or anything. I meant just he
Right.
was like
He
left to support Buchanan.
Let's just say that he endorsed Buchanan.
Okay.
And he worked in support of Buchanan, which tells you a little bit about where Buchanan was headed.
Yeah.
Anything that David Duke touches is tainted, right?
Yeah.
And
I
so
haven't
we
been
made
too kind to Buchanan in the first part.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And so I have heard stories from I have actually transcripts and some other stuff of how all that went down, and some of the stories that I had one lady when I well, anyway, to go back to the previous comment, we actually nominated Ralph Nader specifically to kind of put the kibosh on these presumptions that we were a right wing party.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were basically trying to use that as a counterbalance to diffuse that and remove that kind of aura from us, so that we could then shift back towards the middle and do so fairly cleanly without having people, look over our shoulders continuously about with people going, oh yeah, Pat Buchanan. We're like, well, Ralph Nader. So what do you want from us? And so it was definitely a calculated decision on our part. There were some things that Ralph Nader did and stood for, pro-consumer, things like that we definitely agreed with.
Yeah.
But he was definitely more liberal on the liberal side. Yes.
And that's one of the things and I think most of the American public would have a concern with the Reform Party, is that there's this fear, especially amongst third parties, which you mentioned earlier, how many libertarians are mad about Gary Johnson's nomination.
Yeah.
That a party will make a more calculated effort, but abandon much of its principles. And that's the thing. It's like, how could you be a part of a party that would do something like that? And I saw on you guys' Twitter account, it had to be like less than a month ago, because I was scrolling through it for this interview, and I'm not sure how serious you guys were about it, but you floated the idea about Liz Cheney joining the Reform Party. And I personally doubt that she would,
no, I'd very seriously doubt she would.
Yeah, but it was interesting because I'm like, oh, the Reform Party is a very non-interventionist party, and her father, giant warmongers. So it was like, I don't know. There's like the fear that it's like you'll see someone who would get you more votes, but you would
Yeah,
lose a lot of those principles. And like,
correct.
how does the Reform Party prevent something like that from happening?
Well, I don't think we would nominate Liz Cheney for office.
Mm.
So I think that's kind of a separate issue.
Hmm.
Uh, our ideal Reform Party candidate for president, for example, would be somebody like Jim Webb,
Okay.
Senator Jim Webb, or somebody from more the center in the Senate or
Hmm.
the House, right? We really liked Jim Webb. We talked to him 2012 election. I want to say we talked to him.
I know.
Um,
I know there was briefly a former Louisiana governor who was interested.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Buddy Romer. We talked to Buddy Romer
Yeah.
at one point. There's always a challenge with this because what you find is that a lot of these guys they start floating the idea of running for office,
Hmm.
and then people start telling them that they're going to end up with it being a spoiler,
Yeah.
and everyone's going to hate them, and everyone's going to blame them for getting the
Hmm.
other person elected,
Hmm.
and that's a problem, right? That's a
Yeah,
problem that we
definitely is a
face
problem.
eternally, and people still blame us for the Republicans blame us for Clinton getting elected,
Yeah.
and the Democrats blame us for getting Bush elected.
Hmm.
So congratulations us, I guess, right?
Yeah. Hey, but that does show a lot of sway.
My comment, yeah, it does, but that's not the kind of sway you really want, right?
Yeah.
My comment is that, if you want to blame us for Clinton getting reelected, then maybe you should have run a better candidate.
Hmm.
And blaming third parties for the fact that your crappy candidate couldn't beat
Yeah.
their crappier candidate
Yeah.
is pointing the finger in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Kind of the thing about Trump and Clinton.
Hmm.
Everybody's like, oh, it's your fault that Trump got elected. I'm like, don't blame me that they couldn't run a better candidate for Democrat,
Yeah.
right? That's
And
not my problem. That's their problem. They want to beat Trump. They should have run a better candidate.
yeah. And you could also make the argument if you really wanted to be like, if you're Ralph Nader, you're like, hey, John Kerry and Al Gore stole votes from me.
Yeah, there you go.
If he
Well,
wasn't in the
always that
race, I
thing.
would have done way better.
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, the real problem is that the spoiler effect is a fundamental function of our electoral system. As long as you have an electoral system that only allows really two credible choices,
Mhm.
right? And that breaks and gives you unexpected results whenever you have three candidates or more that are actually credible and have some support. That's a problem with the system. And a first past the post electoral system breaks if you have more than two credible candidates. You get
So,
completely unexpected results. It doesn't measure public desire very well.
mm.
It doesn't reflect public will.
So does the Reform Party support open primaries and ranked choice voting?
The Reform Party support is not a big fan of open primaries per se, but we do definitely, because the purpose of a primary is supposed to be for a political party to choose who it wants to represent them.
But wouldn't you argue, though, that since the Reform Party is so small at the current moment, that's blocking out Democrats and Republicans who are still registered but want a third option and want to get involved? Like, why wouldn't they be allowed in the process?
It's a trade-off. That's how we ended up with Pat Buchanan.
That is true. That is what we were talking about.
It was party rating. It was party rating. All these folks that were previously voting Constitution Party and Republican Party suddenly flooded in because we didn't have any safeguards to prevent it, and we had small enough numbers that they were able to come in and basically overrun us. And now they own now for 2 years they own the party. So there's some the primaries are supposed to reflect the wills of the members of that party, and then the general election is supposed to be the opportunity for those to compete against each other. If you the Reform Party definitely supports alternative voting systems, including ranked choice and approval voting systems, among others.
Would this also include abolishing the Electoral College?
No.
You support the Reform Party supports the Electoral College.
The Reform Party believes that a better solution would probably be a proportional awarding of Electoral College votes on a state-by-state basis, either the way Nebraska and Maine do it, where you do it by congressional district, or on a proportional basis based on the state vote. But still we're leaving the Electoral College itself in place. And it mitigates most of the harms that the Electoral College does by doing that. You gain some of the benefits of a more proportional system without dumping the electoral college, and you still have some of the safeguards of the electoral college in place. Again, that goes back to we're very pragmatic. We're always looking for, okay, these guys want that, these guys want that. They both represent a huge slice of the country. 1/3 of the country wants this, 1/3 of the country wants that. We're the middle third, right?
But what I
How
think
can
is
we implement this?
what I think is quite interesting is that, like if we're being 100% honest, the electoral college, it's probably one of the main things that are preventing the Reform Party's rise. Because
Right.
you think about Ross Perot got 20% of the vote, roughly
Right.
20%, and
And
got
zero
zero electoral college votes.
That's right. That's right.
He would have had a much better chance than, like any other system, more or less, of actually being elected president.
Right. And so from our standpoint, really, what we need is that we need to have some sort of proportional awarding of electoral college votes, or some way of no winner take all at the state level. That's just stupid. It's just stupid. It exaggerates the support that a candidate actually has. Anything that exaggerates the influence or support of a candidate beyond what the actual facts on the ground are is disenfranchisement. Let's be honest here.
Yes.
If you live in New York and you're a Republican and you live in the wrong district, you have no voice.
Pretty much.
And the same thing goes for Texas. If you're a Democrat, you have no voice, because there's just no way that you're going to have it in. Your congressman doesn't care what you think. Your state representatives don't care what you think. Your governor doesn't care what you think. They don't depend on you to get reelected. They do not care. There's no incentive for them to care. And the Republicans and Democrats have gerrymandered the snot out of these districts.
I was just about to ask you that. Does the Reform Party make you promise that if ever elected and were allowed to write the districts, they would form like independent commissions? Is the Reform Party absolutely against partisan gerrymandering, even if it's in their own benefit?
You damn betcha.
All right.
Sorry, language.
That's fine.
Absolutely. Because again, our belief is our goal is good government. Our goal is problem solving. Our goal is representation by, of, and for the people. So not winning. Winning. Once you start thinking in terms of winning and losing, you've completely corrupted the system. And our goal is representation. Even if it cost us influence, we would be willing to put a system in place that allowed better representation for the voting public.
And that's true.
And nobody else will do that. Nobody else will say that.
I have so many more questions that I simply cannot get to, as I only have 10 more minutes of your time.
We can do a follow-up if you want. I'm enjoying this.
I would honestly love that.
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
But so the last thing that I really wanted to get to is, I think the Reform Party, what's the Reform Party's future for 2022? Where are they running congressional candidates? And, how can you get involved? How do you like the actual process? In 2024, while it might seem a bit away, I would argue that they should already be running Reform Party candidates should already be running for president, because as soon as the midterms happen, all the national media will coverage Republicans and Democrats that are running. Right. And so I think it's best that they start building up a coalition enough that the media starts giving them attention right now.
So for 2022, right now, we have limited ballot access right now, and most of our energy is going towards supporting independent candidates and write-in candidates in various states. As you know, ballot access laws can be tough, and they are highly variable from state to state to state. And we had a 4-year span where our previous party chairman, where let's just say that we didn't make a lot of progress during that time period. We've got a highly motivated young man who is our party chairman right now, and I can call him a young man because I'm an oldster. And he's pretty fired up. His name and his name is Nicholas Hensley. He's a great guy.
I saw him on your website, on the Reform Party website.
Yeah. So he has been making a lot. He and the rest of the executive committee, we got a whole new crop of officers in.
Sounds amazing.
And everybody's been working really hard and making a lot of progress. We've seen a huge uptick in social media presence, a huge uptick in people contacting us. Like 100% increase in traffic on our website. and it's just been incredible. And over the last 6 months, our new officers took office at the beginning of last year, and it took us about 6 months to kind of get our legs under us, and things have been really ramping up since then. For 2024, we are already, yes, you're absolutely right, and we agree with you 100%. And we are already reaching out to potential candidates and trying to do some recruiting of potential presidential candidates. Now, I will say this: there's a strong tendency for minor parties to focus heavily on the presidential candidates.
Yes.
And it is a resource hole and a time hole and an energy hole with very low chance of payoff. Yeah. And so we've been putting more of our energy, frankly, into local, county, state level races.
Yeah. I know currently you have 11 elected officials. Is that true?
We have 11 in various local offices. That's right. That's right. Nationwide. And so, we really do say, all politics is local. Look, if you want to have a successful political party, minor party with longevity, you've got to focus on the local races. You've got to get people in office at the local level and build brand recognition at the local level, build structure at the local level. Because if you base your party, God rest his soul, off Ross Perot, off of a single figurehead at the top, no matter how inspiring he is, you put your eggs in that basket. And if that person falls, if they fail, if something happens to them, if they walk away from the party, the devastation is dramatic. You lose your entire core of your organization.
And younger folks have no idea who Ross Perot is.
Right. So now we're now at the stage where a lot of the younger generation, they don't know that. I mean, it's great when they find out about it because it actually gives us some gravitas, right?
Yeah.
But we have to base our growth and our attraction on our stances and on our local organizing, and not focus on frankly, the presidential. We have to run presidential candidates because if you don't, no one takes you seriously. But at the same time, we recognize that shouldn't be our primary focus. It really should be at the local and state and the congressional levels, really where we have more of a chance of having an influence. And really, we really are strongly pushing for alternative voting systems. Ranked choice voting, approval voting, score voting, star voting, any of those systems remove the risk of people having to make strategic voting decisions where they actually have to vote against their own interests and desires because they're afraid that they'll screw up the system.
Because the system,
it's broken.
What's quite funny though is like even in primaries, they're like, go for the more moderate candidate because they have the best chance of being elected. Like there's even strategic voting there.
Yeah.
Also, two final questions as we're running out of time. Would you agree that the Reform Party, at least over the last decade, has had a failure on the social media? Because the thing is, the one thing I can't seem to wrap my head around is the Reform Party has, like, I understand CNN, MSNBC, and Fox not covering you guys.
Yeah.
But what you've seen on social media, whether it be on the left or the right, you know what I mean? Just people like this, just talking about politics. They've been able to get like 1 million subscribers. Even Reason TV is a very libertarian outlet that has 700,000 subscribers. So why has the Reform Party failed on that front, like to actually be able to? And also one thing I will say is looking at the YouTube channel that is on your website, you guys have not uploaded in 9 years.
No,
and
I know.
That's one of the biggest reasons why.
I know. I mea culpa, right? I'll take some personal responsibility for that. I was the party chairman for 2 terms, and around the late 2000s. I would say that a big part of that has been that the party leadership has tended to be a lot of the party leadership at the national level was holdovers from the Perot era.
Yeah.
And so they were older folks. They weren't as social media savvy. And it wasn't the focus. It just wasn't focused. I would say that I can tell you that we're actually working on a podcast right now.
Okay.
So we're going to start our own podcast channel, and we are focusing significantantly more on social media. We actually have now a team that is a good mix of some younger folks and some older folks who have broad variety of life experiences and political views. And they're now on our social media team. And that's one of the reasons why we're having such a significantly higher. One of the first things that Nicholas Hensley did, he's in his 30s. One of the first things that he did was say, we need a team and we need a social media calendar. And we need to say, these are the dates we're going to publish things. Here are the topics we're going to cover. And he put together a 1-year plan of a social media campaign specifically this year for us to follow. And you can see the results of that.
Yeah. I think the best thing for the Reform Party to do is publish videos every single day on the YouTube channel. Also, I saw that there was no Reform Party Discord, which I think would be a good possibility.
We do have a Reform Party Discord.
Ooh, I could not find it. I'm sorry. I looked
it's
for
invitation only at this point. Because it's primarily for organizers and leadership at this point.
Okay.
But I think we might be interested. If you're interested in getting on there and having some discussions, I'll bounce it around and see. Are you guys gonna join after this?
The part?
Yeah.
I
have to try to recruit you. I would be remiss if I didn't actually
we're
pitch.
definitely interested in it.
That would be awesome.
The one thing though I will say is that my dad is always he brought into me that like the idea of always being an independent. No matter what, because he sees parties as more gangs than anything.
I understand that. Yeah.
But I'm definitely interested in, voting for Reform Party politicians.
We're not your typical political party. We have, I mean, if you ever do come on and you see the kind of debates we have and the level of argument, but civil argument that we have, there's a lot of stuff we disagree on, and we'll just hammer it out, and it's great because nobody gets angry.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We can have heated arguments about this stuff, but nobody comes away and nobody name calls, nobody insults, and at the end of the day, we often come out with a compromise position that nobody's completely satisfied with, but everybody's kind of like, okay, this is good. This is good. We can live with this. And you don't get that with a lot of political parties. That we're kind of the anti-party in that respect. We're very, very pragmatic. We believe in, kind of solutions oriented. So you might find it's a very different experience than what your dad may think it is.
One last thing. What is your best pitch for anyone who's watching? Why join the Reform Party?
Why join the Reform Party? Because we are the sensible, sane center. That's why. We are the party of solutions, the party of rationality and pragmatism, and you're just not going to find another group like it. And we've got the longevity that we're the only long-living centrist party in the country.
That is true.
There's a lot of flash in the pans out there. They don't last.
Yeah, I didn't even get to bring up the Forward Party, which you may have opinions on.
we love Yang's spunk and energy. He's going to find out that there's going to be, we've seen it happen. We've seen them come and go, and hey, wish you the best. Good luck, buddy. But
my advice to the Reform Party, constantly upload on social media and also get in contact with independent media, which would likely have you on. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And also, since we're running out of time here.
ran out of time.
Thank you so much for coming.
That was my pleasure.
Really appreciate it. I would love to have you on again.
Oh, hey, I'm open to it anytime. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'd definitely be interested in joining that Discord because I'd like to talk to other chairmen. You see what their opinions are.
Absolutely. And I look forward to talking to Wes at some point. He's the quiet guy behind the camera right now.
I would like to give a quick thanks to Wes and Larissa for doing our sound today.
Thank you, Wes and Larissa.
If they really want to, they could come right here and say hi. That's up to them. They don't have to.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing? It's a pleasure. Thanks for setting this up. Hey, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, guys. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Anytime. Have a good evening.
You too. Oh,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
I was thinking about asking,
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know. Do you think anyone else in your party would be willing to sit down as well or anything?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure Nick would at some point, and I've got, I
Yeah.
mean, several of the officers would probably be interested in having a further conversation with you.
Yeah. My
question is going to be, can I get a copy of this recording at some point?
Yes,
I
100%.
would love a copy of this video. Are you guys going to post it on YouTube or something?
Yeah, our plan is when both videos are done to and then maybe submit it for some like local awards for like a documentary.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So if you send us a copy of it, we will keep it for internal use only
Okay.
until such time as you guys released us to publish it.
Right.
Publish it after you've done your documentary, whatever you guys are going to do with it, or just link us to your documentary so we have the opportunity to actually review it. Then hopefully you haven't selectively edited it to make me look like a screaming raging lunatic at that point.
No, you've been amazing.
All right, thank you.
And actually I've enjoyed this quite interviewing. I was thinking, I was like, if I don't enjoy this, because I've had ideas of not doing just the Reform Party, but the fellow third parties. Those are the things that actually quite intrigue me.
All right, cool. Excellent. All right, have a good one.
Have a good one as well.
You too. Bye.
You too. Bye.
Dude, you killed that.
That was awesome.
Let's go!
My man. Oh, bro. I am so proud of you. Oh my God.
Thank you so much.
You're so, oh my God. Oh, that's how you do it, baby.
Let's go.